and some of the things that we see as issues with agronomy in organic systems down here. And I'm sure that there's a lot of common ground with what you're seeing up there too. And Canada and the United States, share similar distributions of soils. You've got a little bit shorter growing season, but aside from that, we see a lot of the same patterns going from west to east. So I'm sure that a lot of the things that I've experienced here are going to be common to you as well. But to begin with, I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about the organization that I work for, CROPP Cooperative. CROPP stands for Cooperative Regions of Organic Producer Pools. And our cooperative was started by a group of 7 farmers down in the southwest corner of Wisconsin about 28 years ago. And originally, they thought that they were going to be a group of vegetable growers, and so that portion of Wisconsin is an area called the driftless area where, for whatever reason, every glacier that breezed through the upper Midwestern United States missed that corner of Wisconsin. And they call it the driftless area. And the geography of that area is very spectacular. It's an area of ridge and valley topography, and the valleys tend to be real steep, and the common terminology for those is coulees. So originally the co-op was called the Coulee Region Organic Producer Pools. And after they got the thing up and running for a while, somebody thought, well, let's try seeing if we could market some organic milk. And milk really took off, and dairy products of all sorts. And so that surpassed the produce pool very quickly. And so they decided they ought to change the name. So now it's Cooperative Regions of Organic Producer Pools. And we're based in the United States, and most of our members are here. We are owned exclusively by our farmer members. We don't answer to any outside investors. As an employee, I answer to the farmers who own the co-op. And every farm, regardless of its size, whether it's an Amish farm in upper New York milking 12 cows, or whether it's a California dairy farm that might be milking 800 cows, every farm gets one vote. And the farmers determine the policy for the co-op, and we have a pretty good geographic footprint across the United States. We have members in 36 states. We also have some members in Australia who raise grass-fed beef for our co-op. And just last year, we brought into membership a group of English organic dairy farmers who belong to a cooperative over there called AMSCO. And those farmers who chose to follow the United States National Organic Program certification rules are eligible to belong to our co-op. And so we've got a cooperative agreement with them where we bring some of the cheese that they make in England over here and market it for them. And we have more markets for our domestically produced goods here that we can reach out through their network as well. So it works out really well. And we have one member in Canada, the Farmer Direct Co-op up in the Prairie provinces, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with that, is also a member of Organic Valley. We call CROPP Cooperative by our leading brand name, Organic Valley, just to make things easy. And you can see there on the slide, Organic Valley, we have several different pools. Dairy is by far the biggest. We've also got eggs, soy beverages, and produce. And then we have a meat brand also called Organic Prairie, and under that we have beef and pork and turkey. So, it's a pretty diverse co-op and a pretty diverse geography, and it's a lot of fun. So a little bit about our cooperative's philosophy is that, we wanted to create conditions for people to market organically produced food where they could do it at a scale that was practical and enjoyable for a family-sized farm and be able to actually earn a living doing that. And so we are a marketing cooperative. We're not a supply cooperative or anything like that. And the purpose of our cooperative is strictly there to help our farmers, our farmer members, be able to reach markets directly and capture as much value from what they're producing by the time it gets to the market as we can. So if you go to the next slide there where it lists our goals, we're really big on cooperation. Imagine that, a cooperative. We try to very carefully screen people who want to join the co-op because not everybody is a cooperator. And we want to make sure that when we bring a new member on, it's somebody who can work with other people and who can work for the common good. George Seaman is one of our founding farmers, and he's our CEO. And he has a saying that he quotes. I'm not sure who came up with it to begin with, but his saying is that none of us is as smart as all of us. And we really embrace that philosophy. And we try to make decisions that will benefit the cooperative with regard to being able to keep individual farm families on the farm. So one of the things about that is that, we believe strongly in marketing very good quality food. And our cooperative does not follow what has become the modern cooperative model for a lot of organizations, according to a couple of differences. One of them is that the farmers, as I mentioned, actually own the cooperative and they set the policy. But a striking difference is that we don't just produce something and then see how much money we can get for it. We try to understand how much it costs to produce a type of a product and figure out what kind of a price we need at the market, and that's the price that we set. So we don't bargain, we don't get into bidding wars, we don't do any of that. We establish a price and we say, if you would like to buy this product from us, we guarantee that it's going to be a very good quality product, wholesome, it's going to be exclusively organic, and this is the price that you'll need to pay for that. And the whole point behind this is, again, we're focused on family-sized farms, and we believe that people shouldn't have to kill themselves farming. Yeah, it's hard work farming, but people should be able to enjoy that and still have time for their family and for recreational activities and be able to take a vacation now and again and things like that. We're very tuned to environmentalism. We want to make sure that we're taking care of our world and hopefully leaving it in a better condition than what we found it. And part of that is that we respect all life. And so we feel that all biological activity that goes on the farm, above and below ground, and what happens in families and cultures and societies, all those things are very important.
Mark, I'm just going to interrupt you one sec. Sorry. I just want to make sure everyone has their phone on mute. If you can't find the button that actually says mute on your phone, if you just click *6, it should do the trick for you. Just because we were getting just a little bit of feedback. So you can keep going, Mark. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, okay, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of wind on my end, so I hope people can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you, but there is a little bit of wind, so.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Again, going on to slide 4 there, as I mentioned, or slide 5, I guess, everything that we do is organic, and we're certified. All of our food and our production practices and all those things are certified under our USDA's National Organic Program, which I'm pretty sure you guys are all familiar with too. And just to simplify that, that next slide there, slide 5, we say our definition of organic is a philosophy and a system of production that mirrors natural laws of living organisms, and we emphasize that all life is interdependent. So again, we try to respect all life. Going on, again, just not to beat a dead horse, but everything that we do, everything that we market is exclusively organic. The map on the next slide gives you kind of a graphic representation about where our membership is. We've got over 2,000 farm families scattered across 36 states and the UK and Australia and Canada. So it's a growing co-op. I think we've been growing at an average of about 15% per year since our inception, and we intend to keep that going. We're very careful about watching the amount of supply that we have with respect to the ability that we have to market the goods that our farmers produce. So we're a self-governing thing. We limit our own production so that we can command a reasonable price in the market. It's much easier for people to live knowing what they're going to get for 100 pounds of milk or for a bushel of corn or whatever it is that they're producing, rather than taking a chance on seeing what the market is going to bear. So we established that, and that's what we stick with. I'm going to stop there to see if there's any quick questions before I go on to the actual agronomy part. Okay, well, I'll try to leave a few minutes at the end too, so if you think of any questions about that, or if there's more discussion on anything else, we'll try to keep room for all that.
Mark, I just want to say quick, for those of you who I said *6 to mute your phone, it's *7 to unmute it. So I might have trapped you in the mute by accident. So just so you know. Go ahead.
Okay. That might be important. Thanks, Catherine. Okay, so back when you all remember, I'm sure, when the price of conventional commodity grains went nuts. It put our cooperative in a bit of a bind because our biggest pool, as I mentioned, is our dairy pool. And a lot of our dairy farmers don't raise their own grain, or they may not raise enough of their own grain to support the rations for their dairy cows. You know, our dairy farms tend to focus on forages always. They may or may not have a grain enterprise with them. And the size of that and the types of crops that they grow vary. So we've had a history in our cooperative of buying grain, feed grain, from other certified organic farmers who may or may not be part of the co-op. And when the price of conventional grain went really high, it put us in a bind because we had a problem down here in the United States where there were quite a few farmers who we had been growing grain from, who had been certified organic growers, who just saw the prices that they could get being conventional, and they decided they didn't want to mess with the certification paperwork or jumping through the extra hoops to get the amendments that they needed to farm organically, or whatever the reason was. We lost about 1/3 of the organic grain acreage in the United States in the matter of about 2 years. And since we were buying that grain, our farmer members were buying that grain from those people, and it disappeared from the market, it put us in a bind. And so one of the strategies that our board of directors established was they suspected that a lot of our farms might not be paying as close of attention to soil fertility as they ought to be getting the most out of their own land. And they reasoned that if the farmers could do a better job of managing their soil fertility, they'd get better yields of better quality crops, and they wouldn't need as much of the outside grain as they have been relying on before that. So they established this position that I have, and I started here in 2012. And it's absolutely the most fun job I've ever had. I can't imagine doing anything different, and I'm always surprised every 2 weeks to see that there's actually a paycheck, but it's really gratifying. There is a lot of work out there. I'm not sure what it's like across Canada, but there's really a wide range of the amount of attention that farmers pay to soil fertility down here. Some are absolutely top-notch, and some people, particularly members who are just coming on, may have never seen a soil test report from any of the fields on their farm ever. So when we have situations like that, it's really gratifying because a lot of times there's vast room for improvement with those farms. And so the focus of my position is soil fertility. I work as one member of a department called the Farm Resources Department within the cooperative. And a friend of mine, I'm a retired extension agent from down here, and a friend of mine who still works with extension calls our department Organic Valleys Extension Service. And that's kind of what we are. We try to offer some technical support to our farmers. We don't sell them products. We try to educate the farmers if they've got a problem with a particular thing with animal care or animal welfare or nutrition. We have 2 large animal veterinarians on our staff full-time, And we've got a contracted arrangement with several other veterinarians across the United States where if farmers need some help with a particular problem and their local veterinarian isn't able to help them, or their local vet needs help, they can call our vets to get help with that. Our nutritionist does not balance everybody's rations, but she's available to help farmers understand what they should be looking for in a well-balanced ration. If people don't have a nutritionist in their area, she will help them directly. And we've also got a full-time animal welfare specialist. And all of those other people are veterinarians. You know, they have their specialties, but I'm the only dirt guy in the bunch. So it's a lot of fun for me. Again, my focus is soil fertility, but since I'm the only agronomist that the co-op employs, so if people need help with crop rotations or cover crops, or you know, if they've got pest or disease problems or anything like that, they also come to me with those. So going on to the next slide there, and talking about soil fertility there, and we really, really stress soil testing. If a farmer in the United States or somebody following the NOP guidelines wants to apply micronutrients of any sort, they're required to have a soil test that shows a deficiency before they can put that on. But we just feel that it's a good management practice. And really, I can't imagine farming organically, even farming non-organically, without having some kind of an understanding about what the soil fertility levels are on the fields and pastures that you're working with. So our cooperative has an agreement with a private lab from Nebraska called Midwestern Labs, where our members can request soil testing packets from our headquarters, and we send them as many bags as they want and the forms that they need to fill out. The bags have a sticker from the lab on them, and when the lab receives those bags, they know that the sample is coming from one of our members, and so they don't generate an individual soil test report that they send to that farmer. Instead of that, they send that data directly to us. They email it to us in a comma-separated values format, and then we have a customized format that we print the report out on that we hope makes it a little bit easier for the farmer to interpret the results from. In addition to doing the actual sampling and sending those samples in, then we ask the farmers who participate in that program to fill out an intake form that comes back to me. And I ask them basic questions about their farm. You know, what kind of livestock do they have, if they have livestock? How many acres of pasture do they have? How many acres of cropland do they have? For each of the fields that they have tested, I ask them to tell me the size of it, how many acres are in there, what crops they've been growing and what they intend to grow there, any amendments that they've put on, whether it's livestock manure or lime or gypsum or whatever it may be, to help me understand what their typical management has been and what's been going on in that field. And then if they've got any problems with the field, you know, if they see, you know, excessive weed growth or you know, the alfalfa is yellow or whatever the case may be. If there's anything odd going on there, I ask them to tell me about that. And so when I get the results of the soil test back with the lab, I try to interpret those in the context of what's going on within that farm on that particular field. So going on to the next slide there, you can see an example of a report then that we would send out to the farmers. And I would also write them a letter, and I would explain what I'm seeing on the report and suggest some areas where they might be able to do some things differently to improve the fertility situation on that field. In some cases, you know, farmers have good fertility and they're having problems with their crops because maybe they haven't put enough thought into the rotation. You know, maybe they're growing crops in a backward sequence that they should be, in order to take advantage of nitrogen credits. Say, for instance, if it's a situation where they're growing hay and corn and oats and soybeans, you know, they might have the order switched around there, so they're not getting as much value from the nitrogen credits from the legume crop that they're plowing down as they could be. You know, and to consider the amount of manure that they've got available, whether it's from their own livestock or just available on the market in the area. Try to make as much use of that as we can. And then try to customize my suggestions, and I try to teach them why I'm suggesting what I suggest. I'd really love it if each farmer could get geared up on this enough to just look at the report and say, okay, here's what I need to do, and be able to do that on their own. We'll never get to that point because not everybody is interested in soil fertility, and we've always got new farmers coming on who this is a whole new concept for. So I know that you can't read any of the numbers on there, and don't worry about that. It's a fairly comprehensive, typical organic management soil fertility test report. We test for all the common stuff there. And for most of the things that are going to give people grief, I have color coding there to show whether the numbers for that particular component on each field are in a range that I would consider to be low, that would be yellow, or if they're within the range that I'd like to see, that's green. If the numbers are higher than they might need to be, then it's red. So that's basically it in a nutshell. And then I send that printout of that spreadsheet in that format along with the letter to the farmer. I'm on page 11 here, and basically just summing up what I just described to you. So I think going on to slide 12 there, some of the common things that I see problems with down here are probably things that a lot of you are used to dealing with too. There's both deficiencies and excesses. As we tend to go west and things dry out, we see generally higher pHs and higher calcium saturations, maybe higher magnesium saturations. As we go east and to more humid in areas with more rainfall, those pHs drop, and it's harder to keep calcium and magnesium in the system. In a lot of our area, it's probably not as true up your way across at least a good portion of Canada, but in a lot of the geographic area of our co-op, it's really hard to keep potassium in these soils, and so that's a continual struggle for a lot of farmers. And we're really big advocates of sulfur fertilization. We see so many advantages from crop growth and crop quality and feed quality and animal health with supplementing our soils regularly with sulfur, that we really advocate that strongly. And boron, being that it's the borate ion is negatively charged and it doesn't hang around very well from year to year, we advocate very small additions of some of that each year on just about every field within the co-op as well too. And then micronutrients, they may or may not be a problem, but we encourage our farmers to do some wet chemistry forage mineral testing if they're dairy farmers or if they raise forage crops, or if they're produce growers, we encourage them to do some periodic tissue testing to get an idea about what the micronutrient levels are in the crops that they're growing there. And if we need to work on that, we do that too. So I think I've gone on actually a little longer than I wanted to, and I hope we've still got time for some discussion, Catherine, but I'm going to shut up now and see if there are some other things that people can contribute here.
Thanks, Mark. You're actually perfect for time, so no worries there. We have plenty of time for questions. So if you guys have some questions for Mark, just take your phone off mute and introduce yourself and go for it.
Hi, it's Arlen Frick here. My question is just about how does the co-op get its funding to run and to support all the extension agrology people that it has? Is it I don't know if check off's the right word, or member funded, or et cetera?
Yeah, good question, Arlen. We are member funded, and there's a tiny little sliver of each dairy farmer's milk check or each grain farmer's bushel of corn sold, or each bushel of tomatoes of produce sold, or whatever it may be, whatever the product is, whatever pool the farmer is in, there's a tiny little sliver, and it's really tiny. We've got so many farmers, and there's so much value in what our farmers produce that it's just a portion of that. I guess you could kind of call it overhead expense, and that's what our department is funded by. Now, the cost of the individual soil tests, when farmers do that, they pay that themselves. we get a discount from Midwest Labs because they don't send out an individual report to every farmer. They just send us an email with the data. And so they pay $19.13 for each soil test that they have done. But other than that, our time, our services, when we travel to a field day or a pasture walk or a conference, all those costs are paid by the members.
Hi, Grant Rigby here. Sulfur and phosphorus, which sulfur products do you typically recommend, and are there any phosphorus products that actually work?
Oh, yeah. Good question. Well, sulfur, there's probably 4 main sources of sulfur that we would consider. Manure and compost, they have some amount of sulfur in them. Usually, unless you have to put on really gross amounts of those products, usually we're not going to get enough sulfur from those to do the trick. So typically, when we're in the more humid parts of the country, where the soils are leached more and the pHs are lower and there's typically not as much calcium to work with, gypsum or calcium sulfate would usually be our sulfur source of choice, just for routine sulfur maintenance. And then as we get further west and the pHs get higher and the calcium saturation gets higher, we would tend to shift more towards some elemental sulfur. And sometimes, quite often, I'll suggest using a small amount of gypsum in conjunction with elemental sulfur, because the gypsum is available quickly. And even though in some of those cases there might be more calcium than we'd prefer to have, at the rates that we're suggesting, we're not going to be loading up the soil with calcium, but we will get a little early season sulfur out there for the crops to be able to take advantage of until that biological activity gets going to the point where the sulfur is oxidized. So for phosphorus, it took me a long time to come to grips with this, but rock phosphate can be effective. Now you have to be patient, and of course, the more acidic the soil is, the easier it is for that to get mobilized. But it can be effective, and sometimes I suggest using rock phosphate. Oh, I should have mentioned too, potassium sulfate would be the other main sulfur source. If people need to bring up the potassium levels of the soil, potassium sulfate is usually the other sulfur source that we would be looking at for that. But with phosphorus, rock phosphate can be effective. It takes time, and it's probably not as helpful where the pHs get high and you've got those areas where there's less rainfall. But manure is still effective, very, very effective, and really that's my favorite source. I'm really cautious with manure because, in my opinion, too many organic farmers have used too much manure for too long. And they look at it with respect to a single component. They're either looking for the nitrogen, pardon me, they're either looking for the nitrogen by itself or they're looking for the phosphorus by itself. And, manure is a package deal. So I'm a big advocate of using manure where the soil can handle all the nutrients that we're going to be bringing in with that. But if we're just looking at an individual component, maybe not so much. So aside from those, Dr. Martin Entz and his associates at the University of Manitoba there have been looking at phosphorus real hard for a number of years, trying to understand the dynamics there. And they're working on a tool to measure the bioavailability of phosphorus in organic farming systems. They call it functional soil fertility, and they're looking at that with regard to not just phosphorus, but potassium and sulfur as well, and I think nitrogen too. But I really like that idea. According to what Martin told me several years ago, when you have a really healthy, vibrant soil ecology, and you work with that system for years and years, it can look like you're losing phosphorus from the system because the soil test levels keep dropping and dropping and dropping. But really, you may not be losing phosphorus. It could be that it's just tied up in the biology that's there. And as that biology cycles, that phosphorus can still spin off and be available to the plants, and you can have very healthy plants with very high yields and have fairly low phosphorus levels on the soil test. So, I always try to think a little bit about the whole system, about what's going on there when I look at those phosphorus numbers on a soil test report and try to consider those things. Is this a brand new organic farmer who's taking over land that's been abused by chemical farming for the past 40 years? Or is this somebody, is this sample coming from land that's been managed organically in a pasture for the last 40 years? Because I think there is a lot to be said for looking at things that way. So did that answer the question, Grant?
Yes. Good.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Grant. Are there any more questions for Mark on either soil fertility or more about the cooperative?
Yeah, my name is Eldon Brawl. I have a question. First of all, thanks for your presentation. That was really good to hear the perspective from south of the border. I have a lot of organic farmers in Canada struggle with getting fertility onto their land, and that's mainly because they're living quite far away from manure sources. What are some of the strategies that farmers in the States use who don't have manure available to them close by? Are they finding some pelletized products of manure that they can bring in, or are they considering some other soil amendments?
Yeah, great question, Alvin, and thank you for the comment. We have similar situations here too. Some of our farmers are in areas like, say, in the extreme northeast. When you get up into Maine, some of those farmers are a long ways from any of the gypsum quarries. There may or may not be lime quarries close by. Long ways from potassium sources, as far as mine potassium. And, phosphorus may or may not be a thing, depending on where manure is available. One manure-based product that a lot of our farmers use, and it still can be expensive to ship, but you get a little bit more concentrated product with it, is composted poultry manure. And that's a product that is, it's really good, again, where the soil needs the full range of the nutrients that it's going to bring. So that's one that some of our farmers use, and you can justify doing that. Another one, some of your farmers may be able to take advantage of this, but wood ash, clean wood ash, is a terrific soil amendment for acidic soils that need some potassium help. And fortunately, some of those farmers in our remote parts, in our geographically remote parts of the co-op, where some of these other resources are hard to get to, have access to organically acceptable industrial wood ash. It comes from wood-fired power plants, or it could come from a school that's burning wood for heat or something like that. It's not appropriate for soils that have a higher pH or that are already loaded up with potassium. But, if you have an acidic soil and it needs potassium, that's a terrific resource. There, in some parts of the country, when you get close to the coasts on either end, there can be fishery waste, and a lot of times that can be very helpful. We have, in the area that I came from in northern Wisconsin, we have a lot of mink farms. And as long as nothing odd is being added to the mink manure is a really, really potent source of nutrients. So I guess it varies depending on where you're located and what you need, but it can be tough. I understand that. There's another part of this too, is that I always stress with our farmers who I work with is, this has to be practical. And because of geographic constraints and because of the differences in cost of products from region to region, you could have two farms with the exact same fertility needs, and it may be just not practical for one of those farmers to put on everything that he or she would like to address the fertility problems. So in a situation like that, I just encourage farmers, pick an amount of money that you're comfortable investing and do that. and anything that you do working toward that goal is going to help, even if you never reach it. People, I think down here a lot of times get really discouraged because there have been dealers and consultants telling, some dealers and consultants telling people for years and years and years, you have to spend a fortune to get good soils. And that really bothers me because I think that discourages a lot of people to the point where they just throw up their hands and say, I can't do that. I'm not even going to try.
Yeah, just a quick question. Do you do any cost-benefit analysis on some of these inputs?
Yeah, we try to. It can get, I try to do it on a farm-by-farm basis, because the price of amendments varies so much across the country. And depending on the situation, too. For instance, lime, okay. Lime can vary anywhere from, say, $12 a ton applied up to $60 or $70 a ton just to get it to the farm. And depending on how severe the pH problem is on a farm, it may or may not bring a real good payback to put a bunch of lime on that farm. So I try to take it on a case-by-case basis and look at what the results are of the university research that's been done in that region. So usually we can get some pretty good ideas on that. Some of the things, some of the benefits, we tried to do a study back about 5 years ago to really get a better handle on this. And we tried to do it by enlisting farmers to cooperate with us and actually measuring what was going on. And it just got to be too cumbersome because farmers are too busy. They can't keep track of what they need to do when it needs to be done. And if you miss one measurement, the whole thing is pretty much gone. So another part of it is that there's some of these things, particularly with respect to some of the micronutrients, and even with sulfur. We see an agronomic response with sulfur up to a certain point, and that's usually where university research stops looking at it. But we also look at the quality of the feed or the food that's coming off of that land, and we try to factor that in. And when we get into that, we see that a lot of times bumping up the sulfur rate a little bit higher than where the agronomic response is still gives us good improvements in quality. And there's really very little research to address that. So, some of these things we just do. I come from a research background, and this was one of the hardest things for me to get accustomed to, but we really do put a lot of value on farmer experiences and measurements that farmers have done and reported on their own farms, and try to use those as examples as much as we can. Because there's just not enough organic research out there to address all these questions.
Sure. Thank you.
Great, thanks for the question, Steve, and thank you, Mark. Next on the list is Arlen Frick.
Yeah, just a question for Mark. As all the soil analysis that you get done, is it all just through regular soil tests through a commercial lab, or do you have any more specialized organic type testing that you do on samples?
well, the standard agreement that we have through the co-op is with this one private lab, Midwest Lab in Omaha, Nebraska. But we have farmers that have a history of soil testing, or they may be working with a local consultant who use different labs. And I couldn't believe all the different soil testing labs that there are that farmers use. And so, yeah, there's a whole plethora of labs out there that farmers work with. And so, I've been at this long enough now where I've kind of figured out which labs are using which extractions and how to interpret the numbers that they're showing the farmers. But every once in a while, there's a stray cat that shows up that I just have to stop and do some investigation to try to figure out. But we also, in addition to soil fertility testing, I don't know if some of you may be familiar with, there's a fairly new, it's actually an array of tests, and it incorporates the typical types of extractions using chemical extractants that we're used to, along with water-soluble extracts on several of the nutrients. It's not exhaustive. And then they do a Solvita test, a soil respiration burst test. And they put all these numbers together, and they come up with that index then. It's an expensive test, and right now I'm a little leery to recommend that farmers do this routinely on every field that they have tested. But it's a very good test, and I think there is some merit in doing that from time to time, or on fields that are giving you a lot of trouble or things like that. So there are other tests available. Did you have something different in mind, or what were you thinking of?
No, I was just wondering if you, like, most of the time just rely on, like, conventional soil tests. Not commercial tests.
Yeah, almost any of the labs that farmers work with down here are reputable, and most of them are accredited through an independent certification process. But the problem with most public labs is that they don't do very comprehensive testing. For instance, in the state of Wisconsin, the routine analysis that the University of Wisconsin would do would cover pH and buffer pH, organic matter, phosphorus by the Bray analysis, and potassium, also by Bray, interestingly. And that's it. And so from that, then they would project out what their recommendations would be. And we find that, to be not quite enough. We'd like to know what the base saturations are. We'd like to know what the magnesium and sodium levels are in the soil, and we'd like to know the micronutrients, the standard micronutrients there, and sulfur, and like to get an estimate at least about what the CEC is. That method that the labs use by summation isn't perfect, but I mean, it gets you in the ballpark. So we feel all those things are important. And some, a lot of public labs will do that. You just have to specify that you want that done and pay extra for that.
Great, thanks,